Hi, guys. Welcome back to the show. I have my next guest on with us. And Carlos, I'm really bad at names. This is one of the things I am not really good at. So we try to always poke fun at myself for this. But I'm going to try attempt your last name. And please correct me if I'm wrong.
Right ahead.
Carlos Alvarenga. That I just messed that all up.
Alvarenga. Exactly the way.
Alvarenga. That's actually a really cool last name, by the way. I
Thank
love
you.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, Carlos, thank you so much for being on the show today. We're going to get into learning a little bit more about you, talk about some of the broad overview of your book and the research that went into that. We're going to talk about if someone wanted to become more persuasive, how would you suggest they go ahead and get started doing that? And we'll talk about ethos, pathos, and logos, which has been essential to persuasion. But I kind of want to know what you mean by that. So I'd love to hear your take on that. And we'll kind of maybe dive a little bit into any way that someone objectively assess their base persuasiveness, which I think we all might inherently have. And persuasion in corporate America today, because I feel like corporate America escapes us all the time and treats us that way. They always have a niche way of saying, we want you, but you're just a number. So we'll definitely get into that. Well, Carlos, start us off with telling us a little bit about yourself and about you and your research and kind of how you got to where you are now.
Sure. I'll start with what I do now. So I'm an independent researcher, writer, and coach. I'm also, and I focus on communications and persuasion. I'm also a doctoral student at the University of Maryland, where my research focuses on language, communications, and persuasive strategies. Prior to writing and researching full time, I was a management consultant for a long time. So over 20 years of working as a consultant to mostly tech companies, right? Microsoft and Apple, these kinds of companies. And I started my career as a journalist in Latin America, from El Salvador. Oh. So I came here as a refugee kid and went back to El Salvador after college and worked for 3 years as a journalist, and then came back to the U.S. and started my consulting career. So a long career, but really today I always just say I'm a writer. I'm a researcher. I read and I write. That's my job.
It's good things to have. Yeah, I love that. Amazing. And then, kind of give us an overview of your book and the research went into it, like what really, persuade you to go ahead and do your book.
So this book goes back about 3.5 years. I left business and I started to prepare to write my first book, which is a book that's coming out later this year. It's a novel. So I was doing the research for the novel, and I wanted to volunteer to give back some, what I learned in a long career in business. And I came across a website that matches volunteers with nonprofits. And I signed up. And the very first project I was matched with was a project with a international disaster relief agency, which is a phenomenal organization. And the client was the chairman and CEO. And his request was, help. I'm a boring speaker. I'm not very good in public speaking.
Right.
On script, I get distracted, I run out of time, and my team has had it and they want me to get help. So I thought it was an interesting problem. So I talked to him and I realized a couple of things. One is that public speakers, in my experience, and I've seen many, many great ones, some really famous, some not so famous up close. I always say they come in kind of two general camps. There's a classical musician, the person who can read the script word for word. It's always the same. It's always perfect. Obama is kind of in that category, right? Gifted orator with a set piece. Right. Then are the jazz musicians. You give them a theme. They always improvise. It's never the same speech twice, or the message may be the same. They're very good at just kind of on the spot. And I said to this guy, look, you're a jazz musician trying to play Bach. It's not going to work. So let's jazz next time. And also, you haven't thought about persuasion, which is what you're really trying to do when you talk to people. And I said, give me a week to try to find a text we can work with to look at this issue. So I ordered a few books that said they were about persuasion. They really weren't. They were about influence or manipulation or psychology or a lot of other things. And I thought, they're not really about what is persuasion. And so in college, I read a book called The Rhetoric by the philosopher Aristotle, which is about persuasion. I went back, I created a PowerPoint deck of the book. And I said, Danny, let's go through this deck over the next few weeks. And I think this will help us kind of ground ourselves. And it was a huge success. The project was very happy with the outcome. We did a second project together. A year goes by and I've done a dozen of these projects where I've taught people the rhetoric. And my wife said, you really should write this down. You're doing a great job of explaining a complex topic and modernizing it with current examples from music and film and literature and art. And so I put together an outline, sent it to an agent. The agent said, write this book, I'll get it sold, don't worry. So I went to work writing the book. And 3 years later, the book came out.
Wow.
It's a long process to get a book written, published, and then printed. It's a whole other thing. So yeah, the book came out in August, and happy to say it's been well received, and the reaction has been really positive across the board.
That's amazing. And do you feel that people are using this book like in, a little bit about corporate America, or just kind of helping them with like public speaking, or just kind of really feeling that level of confidence they maybe just in everyday life of persuasion, or just having general conversations and really learning more about themselves in the process?
I'd say it's more the last part, right? Because it's a book. The basic idea of the book is the following. It says people think of persuasion as this kind of soft skill or an undefined thing, hard to pin down. And I argue that it really isn't. And the metaphor I use in the book is that persuasion is chemistry with words, right? A great persuader is a chemist, and they understand all the various elements that go into what I call a formulation, because every message looked at, and I looked at thousands, right, across centuries and places and cultures. It's some combination of what I say in the book are 21 elements. These 21 elements I call the periodic table of persuasion, take you back to high school chemistry. And if you learn the table, like you did in chemistry class, you can make a lot of neat things. And then it's just a matter of deciding, which is the formula for this setting. How do I deliver it, like we do with medicine? So, what it teaches you, I hope, is one step back removed from things like negotiation or selling. I call those medicine, right? And we had medicine long before we had chemistry.
Yes.
So my book isn't medicine. My book is the chemistry that explains why this little pill cures your headache, or why this book makes you a good communicator or a good negotiator. It is the why, I'd say, sort of more than the how. So you're right in the sense that this is a very personal thing, because there are certain formulas that work better for one person versus another. So it's a very personalized thing. Even when I coach someone, it's about, of this table, which of these elements feel natural to you? And let's get you better at working with those.
No, I like that. And I think, I look back to my experience in public speaking. I used to be so terrified. And I think still to this day, I'm probably still terrified sometimes. But I think a lot of it, I didn't look at the persuasion part of it, but I also thought it was like I'm telling a story. But I think that's the element that maybe helped me in my past, is like you're a storyteller. Whatever product you're selling, whatever you're doing, or whatever you're trying to convey to someone else, you're telling the story of it. And I used to watch a lot of TED Talks to kind of help through that, because I had to do a lot of presentations at work. But it was always terrifying, because I thought, are they really listening? Am I boring you? It was all these things I would think about that. But then ideally I was like, what is the message I'm really trying to get across? And like, what are the key things I can do to really help me sell my message, or at least sell my story, or even tell my story to the general audience, and then not make it too much fluff, or kind of make it distracting in a way. Because I think when we think of people in perception, we look at people who speak, and I was looking at some stuff from the State of the Union address last night, and I'm just like, what is making me engaged in this conversation? What is making me stay on point? And that's one of the things I've always thought about, is like, how do I make sure, and even with podcasting and everything else I do, how do I keep my audience engaged and not want to wander and do something else at the same time? And I think back to what you're talking about persuasion, like, what is it that you really need to do to really convey that across the board and not feel like you're coming off, I wouldn't say, well, I guess you say like stale or stiff, but like, what is it that's really making you more engaged? People want to keep coming back. Because there's something about Obama, like I would literally go back and listen to that man talk. I just sit there, be daydreaming, like, wow, he can talk all day, that'd be fine. He can talk nonsense, and I'd be like, it's fine. But it was like, what is it that, I would thought that what you said, is it something you just have to be born with? But I'm learning now from you. It's like, no, it's just, you just have to have the right tools to be able to do that.
Yeah,
And that's so great to know that, you know?
and I say all the time, I wanted to answer two questions with my book. The first one was Aristotle in his book says there are three modes of persuasion, which you sometimes hear called ethos, pathos, logos. I just say argument, character, and emotion, or the English. The thing about Aristotle that's kind of kooky is that the more obvious something was, the less he explained it.
Right.
So if it was a really complicated point, he'd go on and on. But if you thought this is just so obvious, he just sort of say it and move on.
Right.
This is in the obvious category. So part of the problem with the rhetoric is that he doesn't really explain these three things very, very much. He gives examples, which you love to do, but not explains it. So I said, well, okay, Aristotle, what does that mean? That was question one. Question two was, what exactly is it to be persuaded? Really persuasion. I'm going to answer the second one because it gets to your point, right? So but I explained the book, and this is where I draw on more modern research. That's not Aristotle, but it goes something like this. We walk around in a kind of what's called a pre-audience state. So let's imagine you're going home from work and you're on the subway in New York, my old hometown, and you're just kind of like a computer on standby. There are messages floating around you, but you're not really noticing them.
Right.
An ad catches your attention. Okay, that ad is going to depend on many things. You speak English if it's in English. You recognize iconography. Things have to sort of work right. The colors don't offend you. So what happens is that you see this ad and you acknowledge it. Hey, there is an ad that wants to talk to me. That's step one.
Wow.
Acknowledgement is just the beginning. Now we get to the next thing, which is engagement. So you start to read. You kind of like what you read. You like the photograph. You like the font. You engage more. The moment you start engaging, the chemistry of the ad starts to create a kind of energy, right? Wow. If you disconnect, the energy flow stops. If you keep reading, the energy flow continues. Why? Because now you're contributing energy. Your imagination. The ad is go on vacation in Jamaica. Hey, Jamaica's great. You go, well, Jamaica is pretty nice, right? So you start, that show that was in Jamaica, that's pretty good. So that energy of your memory is feeding the reaction that the communicator started. The more energy the two of you create, the more the idea of a vacation in Jamaica comes to life.
Right.
Eventually, and Aristotle calls this vividness, right? Eventually, if it becomes real, where you can see yourself in Jamaica, chilling and relaxing, and it's a great idea.
Right. Yeah.
Persuasion has begun. Now we only have one step left, which is called adherence. Adherence means, does it last or does it not last? Because we know you might be persuaded all the way home, and then when you get home, you forgot about Jamaica. Or you might the next day go and book a trip, right? So it's adhered, and that's the process. And it all comes down to that little moment of energy, right? And so you give energy, the communicator give energy, and at some point you go, oh, wow, Jamaica is a really great idea. That is the instant of persuasion. So when you say somebody engaged me, you know what they were doing? The chemistry they brought you was strong, and you engaged with it. You fed it back, and eventually the two of you bring ideas to life. As long as that's happening, you're not turning the channel, you're not walking away, right? You're not gonna flip to the next video. You're gonna stay locked into that message because energy is being released by the interaction of you, the message, and the communicator.
And would you think that, the broad scope of social media and how we have, I like to use this example of algorithms, has really influenced this level of persuasion where it's almost like it's kind of seeded into your brain. And just as you were speaking about, it's something that's kind of drilled into you and you kind of keep thinking about it, but then you kind of see things that are connected to it. Like you're connecting a story, but you're also connecting certain aspects of things. Like we think of Jamaica. I just use an example, like, if I want to go to visit upstate New York, I want to go snowboarding or whatever case may be. Yeah. And then it becomes something that I think about. But now all of a sudden, this level of advertising or algorithms have now popped up to me. Yeah. And it's now intriguing me to say, okay, it's a fleeting thought. Yeah, I thought about it. Okay, I want to go skiing. But now all of a sudden it's like, no, well, maybe you want to go do this. Maybe you should go get a new snowboard. Maybe you should go do this. And so now that engagement that I've had before, now I'm being persuaded to think, you know, I want to go snowboarding now.
Yeah.
Because now everything that I'm doing on level of social media or everything that's surrounding me sort of is forcing me to kind of feel that way. I mean, it's that kind of a double-edged sword in a way. And I think, or maybe it's just a level of advertising and marketing that is meant to happen for us. Is that a way of that happening?
I think you have two things on social platforms. The majority of it is not persuasion, it's manipulation. Persuasion is when I get you to make a rational, willing choice to believe what I want you to believe, right? And Aristotle says persuasion is the demonstration that something is true or seems to be true. In other words, I don't persuade the truth or its seeming of truth. Persuade, right? So that happens sometimes on social media, but most of it is manipulation. Which, what does that mean? The algorithmic choices or design, interface design, the way other users interact with you, what they post is eliciting reactions that are happening so quickly that you don't have time to be persuaded. If you halfway read a tweet, and by the fourth word you've retweeted, you're not persuaded. It's a reaction, right?
Wow.
That's manipulation. The first four words triggered me. Boom! I hit the like button or I hit the retweet. How are you persuaded? In other words, the reaction didn't have time to work, right? It's manipulation. And so the algorithms are very good at manipulating people. At first, it was just to watch. Then it became react. Now they want you to repost or to comment, right? And it's really interesting when you go behind the scenes of how the algorithms work. Sometimes they're counterintuitive because they're all like a big scoring system, like a secret scoring system, as you know. And so how they work, and they're always being tuned. The ultimate goal is attention, because attention is and reaction is what advertisers buy, right? So you're for sale on these platforms, right? There's the old joke of if the platform is free, you're the product. You are being repackaged and resold to advertisers, and that model is built based on what the advertiser wants to pay for, right? There's no mistake about this, right? Social media is they're platforms to sell attention. Yeah, advertisers, right?
Wow. I never thought of it that way. That's actually really great. And we go back to ethos, pathos, and logos, and being that essential to persuasion. You talked a little bit about it, but ideally, is this something that we should always really be thinking about and kind of the back of our heads? Is something we should arm ourselves with this knowledge of knowing, or is it, and in your book, do you really help people kind of understand that and understand these concepts so that it does become something more concrete for them to be able to say, I could do this, or I could feel I'm connected with this, or maybe I already am doing it and not really understanding I'm doing it, and really hone in on that kind of level of skill and be like, this is something really good that I have, and I really want to, I wouldn't say it's a self-help, but it's more of like an awakening in a way of like how to get better at something or learn more about it. I mean, how would you really connect those things?
That's a great word. Somebody who read the book said it's the power that's sort of lying there dormant. I thought about tapping into it. And the three modes, which have been discussed by so many people, my little contribution to it is the following, right? Think of it this way. In any message which is being sent to you, there are three modes of persuading you. There is the character of the person speaking, or the entity, the company, the brand, the school, whatever it is, right? Who is talking? What is talking to me? What do I know about them? What do I think of them? What do I connect them to consciously or subconsciously? How do I feel, right, about what I know about their past? There is the argument presented, and that includes things like logic, witnesses, proofs, quote unquote, the hard stuff, right? Law, standards, traditions. And then there is emotion, which is how do I feel? How do I feel about what I'm hearing? How do I feel about whom I'm hearing? Right. And that's really it. Now it happens that some people are just born really good or really able to use, let's say, character. They just have this innate, I know people this, they're really likable. All right. And they have this innate ability to tell stories and to sort of use the 7 elements in the character bucket very well. They may not be good at argument, they may not be good at emotion, but their character is really good and they do well just with that. people who I know who are philosophers, who are scientists, who are a different kind of person do well. Journalists, for example, do well with argument, right?
Yeah.
People who are very emotive, they make you feel good. They are therapists, they are counselors. They have the ability to bring out an emotional reaction, and they live off of that. Some people, the great communicators, are really good usually at all three. And they have the ability to, I always say, imagine that you have 3 dials in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And so dials go from 0 to 10. And you set the dials. One dial says character, one says argument, one says emotion. You set the dials, and they're very good at tweaking the dials, right? In talking to an audience or in talking to a person to get the best formula working just right. And it's really remarkable. Now, even if you are not native to one of these things, once you know that the dials exist, then you can use them. And I'll give you a really good example of this. So character, Aristotle says, if I have to pick one of the three, the one that's kind of has the most juice is. So I'll give you an example that just happened to me a couple weeks ago. So I'm coaching a very successful woman who was a physician. She retired when she was young, moved to Hawaii, and started a foundation that restores coral reefs, tries to save the reefs, right?
Amazing.
Yeah, amazing. And so she's very analytical, very like Dr. Spock, logic. And her challenge was, I'm doing media interviews and I'm not doing well. I come across as kind of cold and analytical, and I think people are kind of tuning out. So
that's the worst thing you want to happen when you're telling.
Okay, let's go. Your character, argument, and I say you're the typical executive, the typical high achiever, which is you live off of argument, and it's like a ship with 3 sails, but only one sail is up, and the sail is tattered because it's doing all the work. Meanwhile, these other great sails called character and emotion are just tied up and not doing anything. So I said, let's try the character part. So I said, tell me why you started this thing. That's part of your history, right? Part of you.
Sure.
And she said, well, I retired from medicine. I was at home, kind of bored, and my kids were gone. Nobody needed my help anymore. I didn't have anything to do. So it was very almost like depressing story. So I said, like, only what comes next is the suicide. No, this is really bad, right? It's got to.
You're just like, okay.
Yeah, right. So, whoa, that's not the story you want to tell. Let's try it again and think about your past. Think about your history. Go back to when you were a kid. There's something else, I'm sure, if you think back, that is why you're doing this now. Because you didn't have to. You were good. You had enough money to live on. You were fine. You didn't have to do this. Why are you doing this? And she just sat quietly for a while. And then she said, when I was a little girl growing up in Puerto Rico, there was a show on TV, and it was called Jacques Cousteau. There was this guy who used to be a diver. And he was a cinematographer, right, marine biologist. And I was sitting in front of the TV just glued. I couldn't look away from this thing. And I loved, as a little girl, all I wanted to be was Jacques Cousteau. Now, for lots of reasons, I wasn't Jacques Cousteau. I became a doctor, blah, blah, blah. But the minute I finished medicine, I was back by the ocean.
Yeah.
I started diving, she said. And I used to go to this one beautiful place to take pictures of fish. But I was a bad fish photographer. The fish only had the tail. I kept taking these bad photographs of fish. And then one day I came back and there were no fish. And I just saw the coral. And I realized I'm coming to the same place, not for the fish, but for the coral. And at that moment, I wanted to make sure these corals last forever. And I said, that's the story.
There's your story. Wow.
That's your story. That's why you did this. And by the way, as of today, your foundation has an origin point. It was born in Jacques Cousteau with a little girl. It was born at that moment, but its ancestor was the little girl watching Jacques Cousteau. And so that's it. That's all it took, right? The way she just hadn't gone far enough into the past, into her history, to know you have this powerful, beautiful reason for why I want you to succeed, why I want to be persuaded by you to support your organization. It was off to the corner, right? Mm-hmm. We find it, we bring it in, and this is a great story.
Yeah, I mean, even from that story, I'm like, that's amazing, because I'm like, wow. Now that makes me feel I'm connected to a story as well. You persuaded me to see your point of view and understand of what has made you be so passionate about what you're doing.
And we love this, right? There's a human trait. In the book, I say, you read these books about persuasion or influence, whatever, and it's about closing a deal or getting somebody to buy your product. And I said,
right,
I don't agree. I think persuasion is much deeper than that. What do I mean? Let's say you love, I don't know, The Godfather, right? It's like you just love this movie. You think it's the best thing ever. You love Scorsese. You love everybody. And you go through life loving The Godfather. Now, you then meet me, and I go, I love this movie. It's called The Godfather. I just think it's the best thing. And your eyes light up. At that moment, you and I become a community. Mm-hmm. That's why it matters to us. We want people to love what we love. We want people to believe what we believe.
Yeah.
To honor whom and what we honor. And persuasion is this fundamental human trait because we want to be connected to other people. And persuasion connects us to someone. When you persuade me, you go, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about that. Godfather is the best movie of all time. Now we're united, right? And I think at the deepest level, we all have this need to want to share what we believe with other people. It's why we do podcasts. It's why we write books. It's why we talk to other people. So I think at the basic level, there's just an element of human nature that underlies all these things.
Yeah, I think when you strip away everything else that happens in the world and the world today, you do get that. And I think those have been some of the things that I've found most appealing in stories I look into or people I connect with. It's that it's a wealth of knowledge, but I love the fact that you're persuading me in such a good way where it's like you help me understand what you love. I have a friend who's into furniture design and he designs furniture and he talks about the art behind it. He talks about why he does these things. And like, I don't even care about furniture. Honestly, I'm like, I just want to buy a table. But the way he's telling it to me, it's almost like I can understand the pieces that go with that. And there's a story behind this level of artwork that you are creating, which I think any person who does furniture selling or, creating, it's just doing that. And it's making you feel like, now I go back and look at this table. I'm like, well, I know the story behind this table. And now people look at this table now, like, the story behind this table? Oh, let me tell you, it becomes a conversational piece and it makes you more connected overall. So it's really great to think about that. Once again, it's things we don't think about, but we're already pretty much doing on a daily basis.
And listen, when I give talks, right, and I've been giving talks about the book recently, and I say how I always start with someone, finish this ... Persuasion is ... And I've never had I've done 36, client coaching projects, and no one can ever finish that sentence with confidence. And I go, well, here's the problem. It's very hard to be good at something you can't define. Mm-hmm. Now, why can't you define it? Because you don't study this. And we don't learn this. It's not part of it used to be part of education, but it isn't anymore. And so what does that mean? I say it's like, imagine if you had a job and you were trying to become president of a company and you were going through the promotion cycle and they said, okay, great. Dak, you're all good. Everybody loved you. You got great reviews. There's only one step left and you are president of Dak Enterprises.
Amazing.
Amazing. And they go, see that piano over there? Just go play something. You could pick whatever you want. Mozart, Brahms, right? Bach. We don't care. Pick anything. Just whip out a few bars of piano, and you're like, wait a minute. I've never seen that big black.
Right. You're like, huh?
I don't even know what a piano is. Yeah, I know, but everybody who gets promoted has to play the piano. And you're just like, well, how am I supposed to do that? Well, don't worry, just figure it out. And that's persuasion. The skill we're supposed to have to be good at our jobs, and yet nobody told us this. Nobody explained this to us. So what I say in the book is that the book is an attempt to give you this framework that says, hey, this is the piano. It has 88 keys. Some are white and some are black. It's a percussion instrument. It makes this kind of sound. Right. So that if it has to be persuasive, you can at least take out the book and go, okay, let me go reference, this is the part about how do you play Mozart or how do you play Bach. And I think that's really it. It's one of those things where it's so important, and yet we receive no instruction on it at all. So I want people a manual that says how this works.
And that's a really good example. And, this goes into our other question we talked about. Is there a way that someone can objectively assess their baseline persuasion? If you kind of really explain that, but I try to also think of like, what is the bad way? Because I'm pretty sure you get this argument, people like, what is bad persuasion? We're talking like a Putin, or we're talking about Adolf Hitler. We're talking about all the ill-fated people in our political systems and politics in general. How do we avoid those pitfalls of what bad persuasion is so that it's not used in such a derogatory, negative way that people are just, I'm done. Nope, don't call me that way. I think of like the car salesman is what I think about sometimes. You go to the used car salesman, you're like, oh God, what are you trying to sell me now? I mean, how do you really define it? What is your logic behind that?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, persuasion is chemistry with words, metaphor, but chemistry is not an accidental metaphor. And chemistry has a trait, which is that it's amoral. I can make medicine, but I can also make what? Poison, right?
Mm-hmm.
The same thing goes with language. And in chapter 9 of the book, I examine sort of the evil side of persuasion, right? And what happens is that someone comes along who has a very high ability in this chemistry, in this science, and has the knowledge of how it all works, right? And says, okay, I'm now going to flip the rules around. I'm going to remake the chemistry to poison people. And in chapter 9, I looked at a lot of different societies and places in time, and I ended up picking the Third Reich as my case study for that chapter for lots of reasons. And what I argue there is that if we look at the language of the Third Reich, and it's based on a book written by Victor Klemperer in 1947 called The Language of the Third Reich. He was a linguist. And I say, if you look at what Klemperer describes, there are techniques that are being used, right, by the Nazis to poison Germany. And I identify those techniques in the book. I give them a name and I explain how each one of them works. And I said, there were dozens, but I picked 9. And I said, I picked these 9 because all are present in contemporary American social and political discourse. To me means somebody is trying to poison us.
Yeah.
Markers of that are in the language, right? And I'll give you just one example, which I call language blurring. So language blurring goes something like this. You and I are taking a trip and we're going through a forest. And out of the corner of your eye, you see this shiny thing, golden shiny thing in the forest. And you go, did you see that? And I go, yeah, I did. And you go, what was that? And I go, don't worry, it's just a guy playing the trumpet. A few minutes later, same thing happens. You go, which is that? I go, nice. This guy playing the trombone. Happens one more time. You go, let me guess. I said, yeah, you're right. Guy playing the saxophone. Next time you see it, you stop asking what it is. And you are convinced that there's a brass band in the forest. So what does that mean in real life? It means that I don't send you one message. I send you continuous stream of messages.
Right.
You're not supposed to pay attention to them, not in detail. You're just supposed to hear them kind of in the background, right? And Klemperer says in the Nazi regime, it wasn't the big lie. It wasn't anything that was said to be read carefully. It was this constant droning of messaging in the background that played 24/7 that kind of burrowed its way into your mind, right? And so that continuous stream of messages, which are not supposed to be read carefully or listened to carefully, is one technique, for example. And when you see that being played out, it's how you get to a point where somebody says to me, I hate that person, or that person is bad, or I hate this idea. And I go, why is that person bad? You go, well, I don't know, but I know they're bad. Why do you hate this idea or this theory? I don't know, but I think it's terrible. I don't explain the theory because you hate it so much.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you realize you have no idea what you're talking about. Like you've never read it. You don't know what it is, but you're convinced, right, that it's a terrible thing. And so that's not good persuasion. That's bad, right? That's the chemistry has fallen in the hands of an evil genius.
Right.
And it's poison. Now, I say all the time, I wrote my book in a way as a kind of inoculation, right, against this. What happens is that now you know what language blurring is, right?
Yeah,
So,
now I do. Wow.
If you see it, you go, hey, that sounds like, or that looks like language blurring. Let me go check. It is language blurring. So you know what? I see what the game is. So time and time again, like there's a thing called term linking. So term linking means I connect words that don't necessarily go together.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he talks about, in the case of the Nazi Germany, it would be like his name was Klemperer. So it was the first, Klemperer got linked to a phrase, the Jew. So he couldn't be Klemperer anymore. He was the Jew Klemperer. So think of a train where you connect cars, right?
Right.
Then Jew got linked to evil. Next car in the train. So now it's the evil Jew Klemperer. So he went from being Klemperer to being the evil Jew Klemperer, right? Or the greedy Jew Klemperer. When you keep adding cars to the train, little by little, until somebody can't think of Klemperer without thinking of evil.
So you already are linking before you even get a chance to know who the person is, and you're already having that.
Right. So think about an example today where you hear politician A, word B, word C. The train is being built. By media outlet A or media outlet B, right? So when you see people start to build little word trains around people, you're seeing term linking. So now, okay, you go, okay, I need to step back because I get the little game that you're playing, right? Another one is it's dislocation of value, I mean. So dislocation of value is like, imagine that you have a scale and somebody comes in and rewrites the numbers. So that 10 becomes 0, right? And so now you have to
ramp it all up. Totally different. Yeah.
So how does that work, right? Well, the Nazis came in and said, all people are not equal. There are some people who are better than others. Germans, they were called Aryans. So these were athletes, heroes, right? Hitler loved race car drivers for some reason. Race car drivers, right? So first you elevate one small group and say, we have the regular Germans and we have this group, which is super Germans.
Right.
Well, if they're super, there must also be less than, right? But we don't start with less than. We start with super, and then we bring less than. So now what used to be just one person, now we have 3 degrees of person. The terrible ones, the average ones, and the great ones. So I just split population into 3 groups.
Right.
Through these, I redrew what the numbers on the scale were, right? So think about today. We have somebody, and you say, they used to be wrong. No. Now they're evil. And this other person is really great. So we have super patriots, right? Super Americans, regular Americans, and evil Americans, right? And so we've now taken what used to be like one population and divided 3 levels. And now you go, wait, there are 3 kinds of Americans. The really good ones, the average ones, and the ones that aren't really Americans at all, right? Okay, you see that? Someone's trying to mess with you, right? With persuasion. And it goes on and on. There are all kinds of other formulations that are at work. And so, again, once you see it, I'm sorry, from now on, you see term linking. You see
now I'm going to see it, and that's going to just be in the back of my head now. It's going to be like, yep, I know exactly what you're saying to me. Like, okay, great. I'm walking away. Bye.
Exactly. You go, okay, I don't understand what's going on. And if you don't know that, it's easy to think, yeah, you're right. That person's pretty awful. And you go, wait a minute, understand? This was all built, right, to have an effect on you. So yeah, it's a strange thing about persuasion that it has this dual nature, right? And I think that the best way to defend against it is to understand how it works, which is why I wrote the book.
Wow, that's a great example. That's really amazing. We get into our last topic. We're talking about the persuasion in corporate America today. I have worked for many corporations in my last couple of years. Had great experiences, not so great experiences. But what I always thought about when I thought about now thinking about persuasion now, and now that I have the train linking, I'm really putting it together now. It's how these companies find ways to keep an employee stay working for them, while still at the same time, I feel like sometimes undermining them and really, or even scapegoating certain issues that are happening. One entertainment company, I won't say their names, has pretty much told us before I left there that everything is going great. We have this great new technology. We're doing amazing. But the underlying tone of it is that you're really not doing that great. And it's not fully maybe a full part of yourself. It could be a level of technology and media and where things are going today in this world. But you're also not giving the full answers or using, I like to say, publicity reels to really speak on what's happening to not make you want to leave. And it's just kind of sad to think that we are still living in a society where it's almost like, I understand it. It's a business. You got to keep money and revenue going. You got to make budget cuts. Those things are understandable. We get that. It comes down from, things that happen. But to retain good employees, and I'm seeing this in my new company, you got to learn to be very transparent. But I understand that you don't want to be too transparent. It's almost like when we think about space. And you know how NASA is very vague about how they say things. If you let us know, aliens could be a thing or not a thing. We're always going to believe that's your choice. But it's almost like, I don't need you to give me all the information. It's almost like the Ark of Covenant. I want to know everything that's in there. Mm-hmm. But at least don't scapegoat me or gaslight me thinking that it doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And really making me feel that I am not really a part of this when actually I am working for you. And going back to work in the corporate world, it's like, I still work for your company. I'm still a part of this. I like to know that what I'm doing or what I am engaging in still matters, of that I am still a part of whatever our mission is or our goal is in this company to move forward. I mean, do you really think, Carlos, in your mindset, are companies really using persuasion, and I don't want to say in an evil way, but kind of a good or bad way? Is it really ways that we can look as employees as looking to really financially independent ourselves on these companies, but also finding a level of growth with companies to realize, is this a place I really want to be at? Because I think some people get very stuck in their jobs. They get stuck in certain aspects of where they are and are afraid to even speak up to certain aspects of things. And one last step I'll use is my current company. We are really good about taking, we say surveys. There's always an annual survey every company does every year. They give you feedback and some that. They talk about it, they don't talk about it. The last company did that survey, kind of went out the door, didn't really care about it. This company now, we actually had a discussion. We sat down and talked with each other and really were able to listen and come together on that, which I think is a good model to have for any company, where you sit down and really look at the issues. Because my thing is, like, don't ask me my opinion on something that's not working for a company and then just dismiss what I said. You just wasted my 15 minutes to take the survey if you're not going to take any accountability or take any initiative to want to know how I really feel about where we're going as a company. Mm-hmm. So my long-winded answer, it's like,
I think you pick up a lot of excellent points, Zach.
How is corporate America really using persuasion in such a way that we're being manipulated as workers and a society, that we're just either turning a blind eye to it or not really understanding what's going on out there?
I think this is an answer in a couple of steps. But the first step is that there are always two corporations, right? Mm-hmm. There is the reality of the corporation, which is how much money it has, what patents it has, mm-hmm. what customers it has, right? You can think of that as the physical body of a person, right? You're this tall and you weigh this much. There are certain features. You have 10 fingers probably, and that's like you have 10 retail outlets, like you have 10 fingers, right?
Sure.
But the way our mind and our language doesn't always correspond to the physical reality, the same thing happens in companies. There is also this rhetorical construct, the company built by language. Sometimes the two align, sometimes they don't. They almost never align perfectly.
Right.
So when the company says, we're the leader in whatever, and the reality is that you're not really the leader, the language says you are, but the reality says you're not, then the two circles begin to dislap, like they begin to disjoin. Right? The more they disjoin, the more desperate executives often get to get you to believe that they still are aligned.
Right.
Right. And so there's always some disalignment that's temporary. But what happens is that you work at a company and you start to realize, you know what? The language of this company is not looking like the reality.
Yes.
Right? It's like the person who begins to say, you know what? From now on, call me Napoleon. Okay. You're not a Napoleon. You work at Wendy's, right? From now on, I would be Napoleon. And by the way, I'm going to get that really nice jacket. Okay. So the same thing with companies. From now on, call me the leader in healthcare solutions. But you're not. But you want to be called that. So if you were a person, we'd call a healthcare professional. If you're a company, we go, okay, that's par for the course. And so if you work at one of these kind of companies that become disconnected, the language and the reality become disconnected, you didn't have a choice, which is how long do I call you Napoleon? How long do I salute you and say morning Napoleon? Right? And have options to go somewhere else where people don't think they're Napoleon. I leave. If I don't have that option now, I have a problem because I have to call you Napoleon every morning.
Yes.
I know you're not Napoleon. Everybody knows you're not Napoleon. But if I want to keep getting paid, I got to keep calling you Napoleon. Yeah. And that's when the tension becomes very difficult for a human being, because I'm tired of calling you Napoleon every morning when I know you're not. But if I want Jack, I got to keep calling you Napoleon.
You got to survive. Yeah.
I got to survive. So this is the challenge, right? And the thing I tell executives is you have to be very careful that you don't sound like you think you're Napoleon when everybody knows you're not. Okay. And the other thing is, I talk about this in the book, the biggest pitfall in business as leadership is persuasion versus coercion. Okay. Persuasion means you willingly agree to believe something I believe. Coercion is you say that you do because you're afraid of negative consequences.
Right.
And in business, this is very common. Let's say I work for you, and you see me in the hall. You go, "Hey, Carlos, I just read this great book about business. You should read it too because I think it's just awesome." Now, I don't want to read the book. I read the guy's last book. It wasn't that great, but you're convinced this is the future of business. What can I say to you? Hey, Dad, no, I don't feel like it. You're my boss. You signed my check.
Yeah.
Did you persuade me to read the book? No, you coerced me. And I tell leaders, there's a very simple test to decide whether you're persuading or coercion. Imagine you quit tomorrow. Is everything you believe, are all the projects you're trying to make happen, do they continue if you walk at the door? If they don't, then nobody's persuaded. They're coerced.
Wow.
Because if they were persuaded, they would continue doing this even if you're gone.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
All your big plans and all your big ideas and your perception of the company walks to the door with you every night, then you're dealing with that Napoleon situation, right? And I've seen it happen again and again and again where executive is convinced, the company's bought into this, they leave and their entire agenda is gone the next morning. Like an alien that took off in the middle of the night. And you go, okay, who was persuaded? Right? Not most people, because the minute you left, your ideas left with you. Right. And I think this is the thing. You, as a leader in any setting, you have to be very careful about this because of status. Your status has a role in persuasion. People of high status have a natural advantage in persuasion. If you're rich, if you're famous, if you're beloved, right? I've watched Chadwick Boseman's speech at Howard many times, and watching how the audience reacts to him on that day. Here we had a Howard alum who had become a global superstar, right? Had just done Black Panther. And his words carry a lot of weight that day, which is why everybody loved the speech. And it's been reacted to so positive with time, right? If you look at the speech, he's struggling because he was reading a prompter and the prompter was to his left. So he kept looking left, not at the audience, right? And stumbles a little bit because it's not quite aligned. And he was doing the best he could because it wasn't in line of sight.
Right.
So there are mechanical issues. It didn't matter. People loved it because of who was talking to them, one of their own who had achieved greatness. Right. And so I think that in any kind of leadership setting, the important question is, am I really dealing with reality? Right. And am I persuading or am I coercing? Hopefully you're dealing with reality as a leader, and hopefully you're persuading people, even if things are tough, to do what they should do versus manipulation or even worse, coercion. Because eventually you will get caught out.
Yeah.
Right. It always catches up with you sooner or later.
It does. And your morale for your company changes as well, too, and you can see that obviously happen. People are quitting, people are leaving, your turnover rate is changing. And you brought up something so great because, I feel like the company I'm at now where if, our leader left, I think because of the mission of what the company is about and what they really want to do, I would still be comfortable being there and still carrying out that message. It's not, yes, that leader is a good leader. Yes, they're there. They're down the trenches. Nothing against them as a leader. But you're so right. And I think, and one of the great examples I think about this, and now I'm rethinking about this.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at the Walt Disney Company, one of the most powerful companies out there. Don't come after me, Disney.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's like, you look at Bob Iger. I don't think he's a horrible leader, but I do realize when he left and they brought in the other Bob,
Mm-hmm.
the company did not do very well.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm thinking back to him like, but now he's back at the Walt Disney Company.
Mm-hmm.
Now all of a sudden the company's doing great. I'm like, was he that great of a leader that he did this? Or was it that he was so influential and really shaping this company to be where it is, where they're like crippling without him.
Mm-hmm.
But yet things are not being fixed either at the company. And I know people still work there, and it's kind of like, are you really making that real change to really make it a better company than what it was when you left before? They brought you back for a reason. God knows what that reason is, but you're hoping it's because they make it better. But are you really making it better?
And this was an interesting question, which is this relationship between the language of the company and the reality. It's really strained in times of crisis or in times of crisis, right?
Yes,
Netflix kind of blew up. All of a sudden, the whole media world, right? And I'm not a media expert by any chance, as an observer, sort of went into turmoil. Like, what do you do about Netflix? What happens to streaming? All these things. So now you have the language of the company that had been built pre-streaming, which no longer was aligned to the reality of a streaming world.
Yeah.
And now you get into this thing of like, okay, what are we going to say about ourselves? Not just to the outside world, but to our own people. And I think this becomes one of the great challenges of being a leader. It's saying, look, we're in this evolution or revolutionary moment.
Sure.
This is the nature of that to the best of what I understand. And we're going to go through this together. It's an amazing thing about business. And I think people who are academics sometimes don't comprehend it well enough, is that it is a creative function.
Yeah, it is.
People are, to me anyway, my personal opinion is that fundamentally to do something creative, and I mean literally, as in to create something, is just a fundamental drive. And it doesn't only apply to artists. It applies to people who go to work at Disney every day. They want to build something. And it could be as a project. It could be some implementation. It could be starting a new company or a new whatever it is.
Absolutely.
It drives everyone, right, in the best situation. And so I think that if you can convince people that, listen, you are part of a creative effort, whatever that is, even if what you do is you keep the IT running, it's still you're creating a platform that allows us to do our job, right?
Yes. Then
people will follow you through uncertainty. If you don't understand that, then sometimes it doesn't matter what you offer them. They're not going to be there. And I'll give you another story. I was coaching another one, a CEO of a health tech company. She told me this great story about how she came here from China, got her master's degree, to work for a startup in Silicon Valley. But she was employee number 20. Company did well, got sold, so she made some money.
Yeah.
She went to find out how much her exit was worth. The woman from HR kept calling her engineer level 4. Engineer level 4. She didn't even have a name.
Wow.
Engineer level 4. So this is what engineer level 4 gets. This is what engineer level 4 gets. You're engineer level 4. This is what you get. And she said, I was floored because I thought I was a person. I thought I'm employee number 20.
Yeah.
I thought I mattered. What I realized that I didn't. I was just engineer level 4. And she said, I will never work for a big company again. And she never did the rest of her life.
Yeah.
And she said, it's like the person said, I'd rather be a poor carpenter than a rich hammer. Right. And there are people like this. So if you're at a big company, which most people work at big companies, right, or small companies, at least they're not individual people, the job of a leader, I think, is to match the language to the reality.
Yes.
If you're going through change, to acknowledge that and to bring people through that with your language and your rhetoric. And if you do that well, people will follow you almost anywhere, right? It's
anywhere you go.
Like you said, even if this person left, you have been persuaded that what the person thinks is the right path is the right path, whether they are not. And that's the job of leader.
Wow. Wow, Carlos, it's been so great. Thank you so much. Where can we find your book? Is it on the major platforms? Do you have a website? Where can we send
Well,
you?
you can find more about me and my other books at carlosalvarenga.com.
Okay.
Right. I also have a newsletter about art and culture on Substack. So if you go to
Okay.
Substack and put Carlos Alvarenga, you'll find me there. And then the book is available on all the platforms. It's on Amazon worldwide. It is on Audible. It is on audiobooks.com. It's on Kindle. So I did the narration for the audiobook, which was a nightmare.
Wow, that's really cool. Yeah.
So that was a labor of 5 days. So if you like to listen to books, you'll hear me narrating the book. So you're welcome to listen to it as well as to read it.
All right. You gave me some incentives, not persuading, but gave me some incentives. I wanted to listen. I liked it.
Yeah.
Well, Carlos, thank you again so much for being on, and really looking forward to all great success happening for you. And please come back again in the future, and really gave us some great things to think about. And I really appreciate your time.
Dak, thank you for having me on. I'm extremely grateful to anyone who gives me the time to talk about my book and my research. So it's been a pleasure to be here, and I'll be happy to be a guest at your invitation at any time. Thank you. Have a great day.
Appreciate it. Have a great day.